Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Inept General, and welcome to Total War Warhammer 2 Actual Missing Units video. This is the follow-up to my first video I probably made for the channel, or one of the first, which was looking at the missing units from Total War Warhammer 1. We're now doing the same for Total War Warhammer 2. Now, a quick caveat before we kick things off, guys. A lot of these sort of unit descriptions and things are taken from my individual army videos I did in the run-up to Total War Warhammer 2. So if you've seen all of that, you may see a lot of repetition here, so feel free to skip this video if you've seen all of those videos. But if you haven't and you're just curious about what units are missing from the rosters of the armies in Total War Warhammer 2, do stay with me and we'll go through them, and I think you'll enjoy the ride. Guys, other than that, sit back and enjoy, and I think we'll kick things off with the High Elves. And it's worth pointing out at this stage, guys, that this video won't include Legendary Lords. If you're looking for more lore on the Legendary Lords that aren't included in the starting roster for the armies of Total War Warhammer 2, do check out my Likely Legendary Lords playlist, which includes the ones that were included, as well as some of the others. There'll be a link for that playlist down in the description below. And looking at the High Elves, we're going to start off with the missing Lord units for the High Elves, beginning with Archmages. Now, these are very much the magic-focused generals. We've seen these before in Total War Warhammer already. And the mages in the High Elf army have very nimble minds, very deep understanding of the ways and magic, and are very important to High Elf society as a whole. It's said that without the mages, Ulthuan would have sunk beneath the waves long ago and disappeared from the Warhammer world. But through magics, they're managing to sustain their island and keep it going, and have many times been responsible for the defense of Ulthuan against particularly the forces of chaos. Each kingdom of Ulthuan has its own kind of magical traditions, but some of the best High Elf mages are known to come from the area of Safari, where they study the 8 laws of magic, and that's really only thought to be the beginning of their training. Once they've mastered all 8 laws of magic, they then move on to pursue what the elves consider a higher form of magic, which is known as high magic, and the elves have access to this kind of magic as well. As well as being sort of powerful magic users, they also are considered sort of great counselors as well, and are known to have an almost transcendent kind of insight into all matters of state and warfare. So very handy, very powerful magic users. Those are the Archmages of Ulthuan. Another type of general is the Anointed of Asuryan. Now, the Anointed of Asuryan are taken from the Phoenix Guard, who are charged with guarding the Shrine of Asuryan. Now, Asuryan is the head of the pantheon of elven gods, and is thought to be by the elves responsible for their creation. And the Phoenix Guard dedicate themselves particularly to the teachings of this god, and above the Phoenix Guard are the Anointed of Asuryan. Like the Phoenix Guard, they too have taken a vow of silence that's enforced with magic, so you'll never hear them speak. And they spend a lot of their time contemplating in what's known as the Chamber of Days within the Temple of Asuryan. Now, part of the reason for their vow of silence is that once you see the Chamber of Days, there's said to be sacred writings of the wall that speaks of the past, present, and future. And once you enter the room, you're given knowledge of your own death and things that will happen in the future, and thus you are sworn to silence so that you don't repeat these secrets. But it must be a heavy burden on the Phoenix Guard that many of them know the exact moment upon which they will meet their end. And the idea is that this is some kind of unspoken contract where the god Asuryan lends the Phoenix Guard some of his power so that they might be proficient and powerful on the battlefield, and in exchange they dedicate their lives to serving Asuryan and serving the shrine itself. The Anointed of Asuryan themselves tend to only ride out when it's said that destiny is at its tipping point. So in the most urgent of need, just when they need to be there, the Anointed of Asuryan arrive on the battlefield with a host at their back. They have the protection of their god, so it's said that more blows that would have otherwise killed them are sometimes seemingly magically set aside, and dark sorceries collapse around them. In terms of some of their mounts, it's said the Anointed of Asuryan can mount a phoenix, and they have resistance to magic, and they also cause fear, because obviously they have that vow of silence, and I guess silent guys with massive halberds scare people. Now, the idea with the being able to foretell the future plays into their tabletop rules as well a little bit. they have the Witness to Destiny, which effectively gives them a 50% ward save on the tabletop version of the game. In terms of another rule the Anointed Assyrian has is the Blessing of Assyrian. This makes them immune to psychology and gives them and the unit they're in a 6+ ward save. So for them, they already have their 4+, but if they're in a different unit, that unit gets a 6+ on a 6-sided dice to save from any incoming wounds. So they get a chance. It adds an extra layer of protection. This might, in Total War Warhammer, play out more as an aura effect, because as you guys well know, you can't insert generals into units in Total War Warhammer. So that's probably more of an aura effect that maybe gives them a ward protection for units within a certain distance of this general. And that about sums it up for the Anointed of Assyrian. Very much dedicated to their god, he rewards them, they become kick-ass, flame-inspired guys, and do some good work on his behalf. Moving on to the heroes, we have the Dragon Mages. Now, whereas the mages for the High Elves often have the abilities to draw spells from multiple laws of magic, the Dragon Mages go through a kind of initiation. The Dragon Mages tend to hail from Caledor, the region very well known for its dragons and where most of the dragons of Ulthuan come from. And they are said to go through, be studying magic, and at some point they have a vision. And in this vision, they envisage blood and flame and fire, and see themselves riding upon the back of a dragon, the color of the setting sun. And it's said that whenever a mage has this kind of vision, they wake up almost a changed person. They become less patient, less calm, shall we say, more impetuous. It's said that at this stage, their studies into magic have effectively finished, for they no longer have the temperament to master all the laws of magic, and at this point are forced to focus only on the law of fire. They then go on a quest to collect the dragon they saw in their vision, and they go to the sulfur-dogged caverns below the mountains of Caledor. Though it's said that many can never rouse a sleeping dragon, these dragon mages are said to be able to do it with a simple whisper, and they form a bond with that dragon that lasts until death. So these are mages who are able to have dragons as mounts, particularly powerful heroes if you think of that upgrade that's open to them, but they only have the mastery of the one law of magic. So an interesting kind of give and take there for the dragon mages. Of course, once they are mounted on the dragon causes terror. In terms of some of their special rules, they have a special rule called Reckless, which gives them a +2 bonus to casting when you're rolling dice to cast a spell on the tabletop. What that would be in terms of an adequate translation in Total War Warhammer would be maybe a reduction in the costs of the lore of magic they use. That'd be very interesting if their spells just cost a little bit less, maybe by 1 wind of magic value or something like that, than for any other wizard of the lore of fire. That would be an interesting compromise. I think that's a good way to accurately translate that rule. They also have a rule called Warrior Mage, which would effectively mean that whatever spell they pick first, in terms of when they pick spells on the tabletop, they'd get Flaming Sword of Ruin. Now, this element of selecting magical spells doesn't really play in Total War Warhammer, so that might actually have the effect. Perhaps in Total War Warhammer, what you could do is have an aura around the Dragon Mage where the Flaming Sword of Ruin effects are always going on, or maybe a constant around them. That could be an interesting element to add. So you're almost encouraged to get the Dragon Mage near combat, if not into the thick of combat itself, giving all the other units around them the flaming damage attack that the Flaming Sword of Ruin enables them to have. So that's the Dragon Mage. Next up, we have the Sea Helms. These are the greatest heroes of the princedom of Lefern, and these guys are trained to fight at sea, fight on land. They're equally happy at both. They're an order founded by the Phoenix King Belshazzar. They're equally happy fighting with spear or bow, and they're said to be so accurate. They have a quicksilver strike, which allows them to kind of bypass shields and parrying abilities and really just get their hits in on their enemies. These are more often than not found within the ranks of the Lefern Sea Guard, and they are in fact the best of their number. But in Total War Warhammer, we know you don't put heroes into units, so they'd be very much kind of on individual units. They can, if their mount, have a chariot known as the Sky Cutter, which we'll get to a little bit later on in this video. But they do have a few special rules when they are on this Sky Cutter, so I imagine in Total War Warhammer they will be provided with that option as a mount, and that will perhaps allow them to have an extra buff. On the tabletop, they would get a ward save to shots against them in the Sky Cutter mount, and that could be translated over to Total War Warhammer as well. And that about sums it up for the Sea Helms, really. Just the best of the Lefern Sea Guard, very much kind of the Marines, shall we say, of the High Elf army. Moving on, we have the Handmaidens. Now, the Handmaidens are an elite group of female warriors who are dedicated to the protection of the Everqueen. There are always 100 of them at the time, and they are picked from the best of the Sisters of Avalorn, who are themselves the most gifted female warriors picked from the citizens of Ulthuan. They are very much a warrior guard, equally adept at spear and bow, and they have a special rule which is quick to fire, which in Total War Warhammer will essentially translate as they can fire their arrows while moving. But these would be a very interesting option in terms of both a skirmishing and melee focused hero. So that's a very interesting element for the Handmaidens who protect the Everqueen there. They also have a Reverence, which is effectively a buff that they can give to units around them as well. The idea being that if anyone sees the Handmaidens, they know that the will of the Everqueen is with them, and so are uplifted by that notion. All in all, the Handmaidens are sort of drafted in for 7 years of service, and after those 7 years, they're kind of asked, do you want to go back to your old life, or do you want to continue to dedicate yourself to the Everqueen? But there is an out at some point, but they have that sort of mandatory 7 years that they have to serve as a Handmaiden once they are selected. Now, for those of you guys who follow my channel regularly, you'll know that I've mentioned that the Handmaidens will most likely be part of a DLC that includes the Everqueen, Alariel, and to get an idea of my thinking of future DLC and which of these missing units will be included later on, do check out that future DLC video popping up in the top right hand corner now, or you'll find the link down in the description below. Let's have a look at the infantry in the High Elf army. We are going to start off with the Shadow Warriors. Now, the Shadow Warriors were founded when Malekith's betrayal had been revealed and Nagaryth was split among those loyal to Malekith and those loyal to the rest of Ulthuan. And it was the Shadow Warriors who were the representatives of the Loyalists. And being outnumbered and being most susceptible to the fire and madness of what had become of the princedom of Nagaryth, that they had to set about different ways of warfare and really just trying to survive in this harsh landscape behind enemy lines. They began to use ambushes, they began to find particular hiding places in the lands that would become known later as the Shadowlands, and they became masters at guerrilla warfare. Their ancestors continue that tradition to this day, and those are what make up the ranks of the Shadow Warriors. Among their traditions, they try and preserve the ways of old Nagaryth before it was perverted by the lessons of Malekith and his mother Marathi. And they stand ceaseless vigil against any further Dark Elf incursions into their territory, and are driven by an almost boundless hate towards their Dark Elf brethren. However, this kind of cruel and guerrilla-like and almost nefarious way of warfare has put them under the suspicion of the rest of Ulthuan, as they see their way of warfare as being particularly cruel, and so sometimes these Shadow Warriors are looked down upon in the rest of Ulthuan society. But their loyalty has so far always stayed true to the Phoenix Throne. They've known many a time to appear seemingly out of nowhere, laying down volleys of arrow fire upon the flanks of Dark Elf armies or any other armies that are threatening Ulthuan at the time. They managed to strike down many enemy sorcerers with their black-fletched arrows, and essentially these guys are somewhat of the hidden fist of the High Elf army. These guys will probably get Stalk in Total War Warhammer. They may also get Snipe, which is the ability to have range on an enemy and be able to fire at them without them knowing where you are. Now, obviously, with a human player, that has limited uses because they'll be able to see where the arrows are coming from. But against the AI, it's a particularly interesting skill to have. And yeah, these guys would be very interesting to have on campaign. They'll have hatred against Dark Elves, so will be particularly effective against them. They will also, be able to fire on enemies, sneak around the flanks, just get into really great positions for shooting and just taking enemies from different angles and different positions. Much like the Rangers work for the Dwarves at the moment, but obviously being Elves, they'll be much quicker than Dwarven Rangers, and they can somewhat handle themselves in melee as well. Like the Handmaidens, which we discussed earlier, these Shadow Warriors will probably appear along with a DLC pack with a character known as Aleph Anar. You can check out a lore video. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to know a bit more about him. But I think they'll be included later on, so I think these guys will make an appearance in Total War Warhammer, much like our next unit, the Sisters of Avalorn, dedicated to the Everqueen. Now, the Sisters of Avalorn, as we spoke about when we spoke about the Handmaidens, are picked from the militia citizenry of Ulthuan, but they're really just the best of the best female fighters. They guard certain areas of Avalorn, which is where the Everqueen resides. Mostly for some reasons because they involve rituals that the Everqueen's involved in, and others because they've been so tainted by chaos they don't want any elven citizens to happen to wander into that area. And that's kind of their duties when war isn't currently going on. They are at the beck and call of the Everqueen, and their weapons are actually sort of magical bolts. So they'll probably do magical damage, and with each battle they really do try and aspire to perfection, and they're just one of the most adept, if not the most adept, archers within Ulthuan's army. So that's the Sisters of Avalorn, servants of the Everqueen, staunchest defenders, and her representatives on the battlefield. So moving on from the Sisters of Avalorn, we are moving into the area of cavalry, the Line Chariot of Crace. This is a chariot ridden by white lions of Crace. Now, where they get their lions, you may ask, like, who could possibly tame a white lion? They're huge, and indeed they are. But what happens is when these guys are doing their tests, their rites, sometimes they happen upon a home or a den of a lion. They kill the lion and find cubs, and they don't leave the cubs to die. They're not totally heartless, so they adopt the cubs and raise them up to serve in Ulthuan's armies. And these are the lions that make up the ones that pull their chariots. They are gorgeous with their pleated manes, and they cause fear, of course, because it's a lion the size of a horse charging at you with a chariot in behind, wielding two lunatics with massive axes. So they cause fear. They're also stubborn on the tabletop, which would essentially translate into having relatively high leadership in Total War Warhammer 2. And they could be potentially devastating shock chariot that could do some real damage in close combat and melee, and would probably have one hefty charge bonus as well when they go into combat. Now, I was a little surprised when these guys weren't included in the starting roster for the High Elves, but I have to figure it's because they can't quite get their animations on chariots right. Maybe they intentionally left them out, but if you guys saw the wolves for the chariots that the Norskins have, that was just straight up broken, and I imagine they're not going to release these guys until they can sort that problem out and make them look a little bit better than those wolf chariots did. So fingers crossed we'll see them eventually. The next chariot up is a little bit different. We've had the kind of light, quick chariot, we've had the big, devastating melee chariot, and next up we have the elven flying chariot, the Lefern Sky Cutter. Now, these things are attached to a swift feather rock, which isn't a grey eagle, it's a different kind of bird, and they pull along the chariot, which is suspended in the air not by the bird itself, but by kind of a magical cushion that lifts it and enables it to fly. Now, this chariot can come in two forms that aren't really interchangeable as such, but it can come with a crew with no special attachment, so a crew of 3, I believe it is, or it can come with a crew of 2 and an eagle eye bolt thrower on it, and that will rain down arrows as well as bolts, and the crew themselves would be armed with bows. So very much kind of more of a missile-focused flying chariot, this one, particularly when armed with the artillery piece. Now, these guys are used a lot by the navies of Ulthuan to kind of scout out ahead of where the navy's going, get a read on the area, as well as with the armies. So very much kind of scouts, not going to be diving in and getting involved with the melee. It's not really their ideal usage. So you can have the 3 crew or the 2 crew and the bolt thrower, or you can have them as a mount for the Sea Helms, who we mentioned earlier in the video, the hero unit. So the Sea Helms can stride upon the chariot, but again, he'd be taking the place of 2 crew, so you can't have a Sea Helm in the tabletop at least, and the bolt thrower. You'd have to pick one or the other. So I see that kind of playing out, and we've seen this kind of unit before that can be a unit by itself in Total War Warhammer, but also be a mount for a hero unit. So that's how I see it being implemented in Total War Warhammer 2. So that's the Sky Cutter, very much a good harassing and haranguing unit, and if need be, can get involved in melee, particularly against missile units, just chasing them down, scaring them off. So that is the Lefern Sky Cutter. Moving on to the Lizardmen army, let's have a look at some of the units they're missing from the starting roster. The Ripidactyls just themselves, the animals, just love a bit of slaughter. They're very aggressive. They will eat a skink without a second thought. They, from birth, are on the attack. It said when a Ripidactyl egg hatches, it attacks the first thing it sees. So the Ripidactyls, very aggressive animals, very dangerous, and they seem almost uncontrollable. But it said that if a skink gets one from an egg, manages to survive the first year of trying to tame it and rear it, it will probably accept the skink as a master. But that's a very risky year the skink has there, trying to bring up this Ripidactyl. Because Ripidactyls can't really, be trained to lift up balls and drop them on enemies, or even really just to stay out of the fray of battle for long enough, the Ripidactyl riders aren't armed with javelins, they're armed with spears. So they have to be prepared to charge in, because if riding a Ripidactyl, you're going to get involved in close contact fighting. So these guys are fighters. These guys are a melee fighting unit, more akin to the Pegasus Knights than the Eagle Riders of the Wood Elves. So the Pterodons more like the Eagle Riders, the Ripidactyls more like the Pegasus Knights, or even the Hippogriff Knights, if I'm honest. So these guys descend on an enemy, they dive like a kind of peregrine falcon, tuck their wings in, and just dive at tremendous speeds into enemy units. So they should have an enormous charge bonus for my money. And they can be just devastating once they land. It's described as being just a hurricane of claws and beak and blades, and it's just an absolute disaster once these guys set upon you. Now you might ask, if these things are so wild and uncontrollable, how do the Lizardmen get them to target specific units at specific times? Now this is actually quite a funny little bit of lore as far as the Ripidactyls are concerned. The Ripidactyls have an animal known as the Bolt Toad, and the Bolt Toad is a stinking massive toad in Lustria. Not massive like car massive or slan massive, but big for a toad. And these things like to eat, more than anything else on Earth, Ripidactyl eggs. And they're said to just stink to high heaven. A pack of these toads together is enough to chase off even the fiercest predators in Lustria. But Ripidactyls know naturally that these guys try to eat their eggs, and so kill them on sight or on smell, shall we say. And what these skinks do, the sneaky little gits that they are, is on at least the theory goes like this, that the skinks sneak into like the tents or something of the units, or just on the battlefield with these toads, and sneak them into the units that they want the Ripidactyls to target. Now we're not going to see little skinks you're not going to have to throw toads into units that you want these guys to target, but that's just the idea that Games Workshop had as to how you're able to control these uncontrollable animals in any way, shape or form. So there's a fun little bit of lore for you. It's because there's a stinky toad in the regiment they're targeting, and so they just dive down and try and absolutely massacre them, searching for the toad, really, just kind of accidentally killing all the living things in the unit. But that's the Ripidactyl riders, armed for close combat. The riders are ready to dive in, let their fierce animals do all the damage, and kind of probably ride out again. They're probably much more of a shock cav, or shock flying cav, than anything else. I wouldn't keep them in melee for too long, because I imagine those wings are fairly fragile. So moving on from the Ripidactyl, that kind of sums up all our cavalry. So next we have monsters, the Jungle Swarm. Now if you've seen my Legendary Lords video, you'll know I mentioned the Jungle Swarm very much in relation to the character, the Prophet of Sotek. And so if they make an appearance, they'll probably make an appearance along with the Sotek DLC. Again, one of the Lord packages I've hypothesized in my future DLC video. You'll find a link to that below, as I mentioned earlier, but very much tied to him. Now the Jungle Swarm essentially is snakes and lizards from all over Lustria that are kind of summoned up to fight on behalf of the Lizardmen. Now, if you have seen it, imagine, if you will, best way I can describe this, and an image I've not been able to get out of my mind, is if you've seen Planet Earth 2 with David Attenborough, there's that very iconic scene, I think in the first episode, of those snakes chasing down baby iguanas as they emerge from their underground hatcheries. And it's essentially if the baby iguanas and the snakes, rather than trying to eat each other, decided to work together and then charged in trying to kill all the humans around, that's the kind of nightmare scenario you're looking at here. So imagine a poor person walking down the beach and just being covered in iguanas and those slivery snakes, and you've got an idea of what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen that scene, I will put a link to, I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere, in the description. Check it out. It's terrifying in its own little way. So that's the Jungle Swarm. There are some guys and some units that give benefits to the Jungle Swarm, particularly the Prophet of Sotek. So look out for him. I imagine he'll probably be a DLC. He won't be one of the starting Legendary Lords. But I digress. I get into that in my Legendary Lords video. Check that out again in the description if you want to. But the Jungle Swarm are poisonous. They're aquatic, so they should also not have any trouble moving in marshland or over water for that matter, and they're poisonous. Now they're quite a hardy unit, but they're not hugely fast, so they can take quite a bit of hits. I'm not exactly sure of the role they'll play in Total War Warhammer 2, but I look forward to seeing them. They're sort of hardy units, they can do a lot of damage, but they're not the quickest in the world. So looking forward to seeing Jungle Swarms. Now this will be quite a hard one, I imagine, for Creative Assembly to implement. It's kind of like a carpet of lots and lots of tiny moving creatures. So how they do that, how Creative Assembly bring that into reality, I'm very excited to see. It'll be very interesting. I imagine they might make it even a floor effect that kind of moves along the ground. I don't know. I'm excited to see what they do with it, but maybe not one of the easiest units for them to implement. Next, we have the Razordon. Now, the Razordon is a vicious little creature. Well, not little, you can see it there compared to a skink. It's kind of big. And it lives mostly in the area known as the Amoxon Basin of Lustria. Now, it feeds mostly on the huge insects that live in the place, and it's said that the insects in this part of the world in Lustria are so thick and dense in the air that they block out the noonday sun. Now, we're not talking our kind of insects here, and they're just doing it with sheer numbers. We're talking about the Razordon's favorite meal, which is known as the Stegawasp, which is said to be the size of a horse. So we're not talking small insects here, we're talking enormous insects. So what he does actually is he's aquatic as well. So he goes and he lies in like a little shallow river or something, or a bed, and just kind of peeks his eyes out. And as the insects fly overhead, he shoots out these barbed spikes that you can see on his skin here. So he's kind of like a living piece of artillery, as I mentioned at the top of this section. Fires out these spines, captures his prey, and then eats it up. And the skinks kind of saw this and went, oh, we can use that in battle. So they prod and pring these guys, and they're not the hardest to tame, but not necessarily the easiest. And you have to watch out for flying like barbs. But how do you get this creature to fire? And really, the answer is pretty simple. You just poke it with a stick, and it will fire off its things. And it's up to the kind of the skink handlers to try and get it to aim with any kind of accuracy. Now, its range isn't quite that of, say, a cannon or anything like that. It's quite short range, but it is a moving creature. So there's a lot of mobility there for a creature like this in terms of where it can attack from. Now, in terms of its barbs itself, like the spikes it shoots are barbed. It shoots off with such power, it's said to be able to shatter shields and pierce armor. And it's really just this kind of horrific, crazy, little living artillery piece that has said in previous battles a pack of them have been known to just absolutely massacre entire regiments of Bretonnian knights. They cause fear because they're kind of terrifying looking, and as I mentioned before, do have the aquatic ability. In terms of the special rules, the Razordon did have the special rule called Instinctive Defense, where if you charged it on the tabletop, it would automatically fire barbs at you as a kind of Overwatch mechanic. Now, you could do that in Total War Warhammer, whereas maybe if you charge it, it fires off something that kind of breaks the power of the charge, something like that, or maybe just give it charge defense as an alternative. That could be the simplest way of doing it, rather than show an animation with it quickly firing off a surprised volley as a unit tries to charge it down. But it can fight in melee to a certain extent, and yeah, essentially a living fighting artillery piece. that can do some damage. But a cool little unit to have, and gives the Lizardmen some much needed missile options. Now moving on from the Lizardmen, we have the Salamander. Now the Salamander essentially is a moving flamethrower. These are predatory creatures that live in Lustria. They fire out a corrosive, flammable liquid that sticks to someone like pitch or tar and then sets them alight. And it's a very horrific way to die, one must imagine. It has these frills around its neck and on its back. The idea between them is not just to look cool, but it's to, because it's a cold-blooded creature, it can't overheat from the flame shooting out its own mouth. So it has to have these folds of skin to lose heat quicker. And again, it comes with its own skink handlers. Now, whether we've seen it before in Total War, where you have minders for animal units, but we haven't seen it in Total War Warhammer yet. So maybe we'll see it in Total War Warhammer 2 of the skinks looking over the Lizardmen, which we saw before, and the Salamander, and just kind of guiding them around in packs. But these guys would essentially fire off a breath weapon. Now, the way I see this implemented in Total War Warhammer is, because you don't want to be casting it with these guys, because you want them to be acting very much as a missile unit, is I imagine their flames would very much look like the Iron Drakes, maybe a bit wider, maybe spread out a bit more at the end. But it'd be very much like the Iron Drakes firing is how we'd see these guys firing off their attacks in Total War Warhammer. And again, mobile, but again, a missile unit, semi-missile, semi-artillery unit that can just move around the battlefield. A lot of mobility there. Now, the Salamanders are a hugely iconic Lizardmen army unit, and it was a huge surprise not to see them in the starting roster for the Lizardmen, but I have to imagine we're definitely going to see them in the army roster at some point further down the line in the evolution of the Lizardmen army. Now, the next creature we have coming up on the monster side of things is the Troglodon, or the Pale Death. It goes by both names. Now, these creatures live in caves by themselves. They're virtually blind. They're kind of like a mix between a dinosaur, a snake, and a catfish. They can't see, so they have these whiskers that come out of their heads, and they're very sensitive, much like a catfish. And it has a forked tongue that it darts out to try and taste the air, much like snakes do. Its teeth are hollow like a snake's, and so when it bites down on something, it starts injecting it with huge amounts of venom, and it can spit out this venomous bile as a kind of projectile at other enemies. Now, for a long time, the Troglodon was considered an untamable creature, but much like with the cold ones, there emerged a type of skink known as a skink oracle that had a kind of instinctive ability to tame them. They could just walk up to them and they'd have this kind of mutual understanding. Now, the skink oracle is very different to other skinks in that they have a forked tail, kind of representing the forked tongue of the Troglodon itself, almost born for one another. In fact, probably are born for one another. Now, once the skink gets his hands on one of these massive beasts, he likes to decorate it up a little bit, put some feathers on it, put some gold on it, and, you know, just kind of make it ceremonial, make his Troglodon bling, if you will. And these guys just go around together causing all kinds of chaos. The oracles themselves, from a lore perspective, tend to spend their time going around Lustria, trying to identify disturbances in the geomantic web, which is kind of like this web of energy that the Lizardmen can tap into. And if there's a disturbance, it usually means chaos has moved in somewhere, or someone's trying to pillage one of their old ruins, or something bad's going down. So these guys go and check it out, or they're looking for divining powers. So just try and search for the mysteries of old, really. So that's what the oracles and the Troglodons tend to do in their spare time. The oracle themselves can be armed with a javelin, and that can be poison or not. This Troglodon creature can cause terror. It hisses like a snake at you. It has very clammy skin. It's a terrifying animal. So yes, causes terror. Poison, of course, because it's venom. Has a projectile weapon. Is aquatic as well. So if one of these things managed to hide in marshland, that would be terrifying. You'd never want to fight them in the marshiest maps of the world with one of these in their armies. Now, the Troglodon has kind of a comparable range as the Lizardmen in terms of how far its poison attack can reach, but it's pretty handy in close combat as well. In terms of the Troglodon ability, I mentioned the bile spitting. It also has its roar, which gives a bonus to an ability called Predatory Fighter, which on the tabletop would allow units with this skill to get more attacks, and the Troglodyte would boost this skill to make it easier to do this. In terms of how that ability would necessarily translate into Total War Warhammer, it would probably be an activated ability that has a radius around it that gives a boost to melee attack. So that's what it would do in Total War Warhammer. I think is the best kind of translation from the tabletop rules. Give all your guys a better chance to hit rather than more attacks, because more attacks doesn't really translate into Total War Warhammer. So an increased chance to hit would be probably the closest you could get to the ability it has on the tabletop. So that's its roar. It kind of gets people going with that ability. That'd be pretty cool to see in Total War Warhammer. Is it just a big, huge, terrifying dinosaur? But that is the Oracle and the Troglodyte. They go around together, hand in hand, partners in crime, and terrifying partners in crime at that. Next up, we have a type of Stegodon missing from the Lizardmen army unit, and that is the Engine of the Gods. As we mentioned, this Engine of the Gods can be a potential mount for skink priests. Now, I think we might see this implemented not unlike the carts for the undead, where it can be a mount, but can also be a unit you get separately. So I think that's how we might see the Stegodon Engine of Gods implemented. It could be a mount for the Skink Priest, or it can be a unit by itself. And it has the Skink crew with javelins, throwing them down all the time. But the Engine of Gods itself has some interesting rules. It has an ability called Arcane Configuration, which reduces the cost of magic spells in the tabletop version of the game. So if that had the similar effect, it could really boost up an army and boost up the already potent magic users that the Slann Mage Priest will be. Whereas an ability cost 8 Winds of Magic before, it could now cost 6 or even 4. And that could be an incredible ability to have, and an incredible benefit to have in terms of this Engine of the Gods. So that's the Arcane Configuration ability there. It also has an ability called Burning Alignment, and that is essentially a radius spell that does flame damage. So it would act like the vortex spells of fire, but only hurt enemies and not move. I think that's really how that would be implemented. Now, I don't think you'd summon it on top of yourself in Total War Warhammer, because I think that would throw a few people off. So I think what this might end up being is kind of like a bound spell that you can cast within a certain distance. That's how I see it going in Total War Warhammer. Or it could maybe be a ground effect that causes burning damage, something like that. But I'm interested to see how they implement it. But that's what the Stegodon Engine of the Gods does. It can go in and cause burning damage, and it boosts a lot of your magic user stuff. So it can bring down the cost of spells, which would be a hugely effective little piece of equipment to have. Very much looking forward to the Engine of the Gods on the back of the Stegodon there. Now, moving on from the Stegodon, we have the Bastillodon, and this is the Ark of Sotek. Now, for those of you who have seen the Legendary Lord video before you saw this one, you know that Sotek is the Lizardmen god of snakes, or the snake god of the Lizardmen. The Ark of Sotek is an interesting little thing. The idea is it has these kind of tube things here, and essentially it has underneath it a basin full of coals. Now, because the Bastillodon's skin is so thick, it doesn't care that you have essentially a fire on its back, and it doesn't bother it at all. But it kind of heats up these tubes, and out of these tubes spawn an infinite amount of snakes. Now, they never run out. Just snakes keep coming out of these tubes continuously. And around the Bastillodon with the Ark of Sotek, this thing would just kind of give out a radius of damage around it, much like the Claw of Nagash does in Total War Warhammer already. So if you're just around it, it should have a cool little like motiony like carpet of snake effects around it, but any enemy unit caught in this radius should be taking damage all the time. It also has the ability, if you have the unit Jungle Swarm, which we talked about earlier. Now, the way this plays out in the tabletop is it gives that unit an extra base, allowing that unit to attack more things, sort of have a larger surface area, but that doesn't really translate into Total War Warhammer. So in Total War Warhammer, the way I see this happening is very much like the Ragnarok Queen, is that the Bastillodon within a certain range will be able to summon a jungle swarm that kind of appears out of the ground and starts attacking the enemy unit. I think that's how it goes, much like a zombie summon or something like that. That's how I see the Ark of Sotek play in terms of that ability. But yeah, essentially these kind of pipes
on top of burning coals to kind of chase out all the snakes hidden in all the nooks and crannies of this odd mechanism, this kind of semi-magical mechanism they have up there that just pours out endless snakes. Very creepy little idea, but there you go. And again, skinks on top. Skinks always throwing poison javelins. Poison javelins. So it gets extra attacks from that as well.
Now I'm just going to use a couple of units which probably won't ever make it into the Lizardmen army, but I thought might be fun just to mention for, you know, giggles. So the first one is a unit that came out from Forge World. We may see it, but it's the most unlikely of the ones I've gone through so far, and that is
the Dreadsaurus. Now, a lot of you guys who will have watched my army for the Lizardmen will have known I mentioned the Dreadsaurus. The Dreadsaurus is the terrible lizard beast that went around in the primordial days of the Lustrian jungle, fighting and battling with the should we say the ancestors of the dragons. One maybe wouldn't classify them as dragons yet, but the creatures that would go on to become dragons. That's how long ago these two things were battling with one another. And it said the Dreadsaurus is the reason that you don't find dragons in Lustria today, because they simply hunted them to extinction. These things are just uncontrollable monsters. The apex predator of Lustria, but very, very rare and often seldom seen. Some lizard men will go their whole lives of never seeing a Dreadsaurus. When they are captured by the Lizardmen, they're often sort of not implanted, but have these ceremonial and magical armors placed upon them, because these are the only methods by which the Slan Mage Priests, through their kind of telepathic control, can even hope to point these guys in the right direction in the middle of a battlefield. They won't take any riders, so you won't see anyone using one of these bad boys as a mount, but the Slan Mage Priest can kind of point them in the right direction, and they can reap absolute havoc. Now, these guys, the reason I didn't involve them in the Lizardmen video is because they're actually a Forge World model, but it did have rules on Fancy Battle on the tabletop, and it was an absolute beast. So it has this ceremonial armor that gives it also magical properties. So not only does it allow the Slan mages to control these monsters, it gives them the ability to become ethereal, so that they get that physical resistance from etherealness. They have impact hits on the tabletop, which essentially means they have devastating charge, and when they charge into something, they get extra attacks. So just means that in Total War Warhammer, these guys would just have a huge charge impact. They're tough as nails, so they're ethereal, they have flaming attacks, they have Killing Blow as well, which is an ability we've seen some hero units have on Total War Warhammer so far. They're unbreakable, and they can do Ambush, which would, I think, probably translate most accurately to Total War Warhammer as Stalk, so they would be able to be hidden. So not only is it a devastating wrecking train, but you wouldn't see it until it's right on you as well. So just an absolutely terrifying monster on the tabletop. And I fingers crossed it does get introduced into Total War Warhammer 2 as well, because it would just be horrific to see. So this absolute monstrosity, eater of dragons, just a terrible, terrible beast. And that's the Dreadsaurus, guys.
And so next up, we have
Thunder Lizard. Now, this thing is meant to be huge. If you can't quite tell the detail, the green around it is not grass. That is meant to be trees. And there are Saurus, which are like 8-foot tall warriors, and they're tiny compared to it. And there are skinks crawling all around this. Now, this was a custom job. I don't think they ever released a model for the Thunder Lizard. It would be too big to carry around. But I would love to see a Thunder Lizard. But it's just the idea there are a few of these just gargantuan behemoth lizards known as Thunder Lizards that tend to wander the jungles of Lustria as well.
And that's about it for Lizardmen. Let's move on, and next up we have
the murderous Dark Elves.
So let's take a look at the missing lords from the Dark Elf army.
Supreme sorceresses. Now these are the best of the best of the best of the sorceresses that Nagaroth has to offer. Now in terms of supreme sorceresses and sorceresses in general in the Dark Elf society, most of them are pupils of Morathi, or Morify, depending on your preferred pronunciation. Now, she She is the mother of Malekith, the king of the Dark Elves, and she was really the first to flirt with using the dark powers of chaos to kind of invent lore onto her own, which is this dark magic lore. And she's been teaching this to her sorceress understudies. Now, she was the first one to kind of straddle that line between normal winds of magic, well, between winds of magic as have been usable by elves historically, and bringing in this kind of chaos influence, because anyone who tried before had been driven mad or had succumbed to the perversions of chaos. Not to say that Morathi hasn't necessarily done that. But she's said to have sort of straddled that line by incorporating a number of blood sacrifices and carrying out a number of dark rituals to enable her to delve into this area of magic. And she started this group of magic sorceresses in her city of Grond, which is a little bit north of the capital of Nagaroth. And it's there she really holds court and is the center of this dark covenant of sorceresses. Now, you might ask, what about the blokes in Dark Elf society? And yes, there are magically talented men in Dark Elf society, but these are living in hiding or have essentially been hunted to extinction, because Malekith once came across a prophecy known as Prophecy of Demise, which spoke of a great warrior being driven away from his home by a sorcerer. And so Malekith, in his arrogance, assuming this great warrior was of course him, has decided that all sorcerers need to be put to death, and he's put bounties on their heads of any male practicing sorcerer, and he essentially tries to hunt them to non-existence. So you won't find them in Malekith's ranks, plodding along with the sorceresses, because they're all in hiding or all dead, effectively. The members of Morathi's coven aren't necessarily restricted just to the dark lore of magic. They also have access to the other 8 laws of magic that the Empire has used that you'd have seen before, celestial, light, shadow, metal, that kind of thing. So they have access to all the other laws of magic as well. But the sorceresses themselves only have access to one of these, and that about sums it up for the Supreme Sorceresses. Now, moving on, we have the High Beastmaster. Now, I very much see the High Beastmaster coming in as some sort of DLC. Essentially, the Beastmasters in Dark Elf society tend to hail from their cities of Klar, Karond, or Karond-Kar, and they tend to be based mainly out of there. They go around hunting great monsters from the hills and mountains and seas around Nagaroth, and kind of just essentially enslave them to serve the Dark Elves and to fight in their battles. They have an ability called Beast Slaver, which gives a huge boost to monsters within a certain distance of them in the tabletop version of the game. Now, I think in Total War Warhammer, it wouldn't be a radius thing, it'd probably be a map-wide boost to all monster units. And these guys would be not dissimilar to how they built Isabella in Total War Warhammer, where they'll have a lot of buffs to monstrous units, monstrous infantry, monsters in general, and you'll be kind of encouraged to have kind of a monster-focused army with these guys leading the charge. They're just essentially sort of cunning trappers and hunters, and they will, with a flick of their whip, manage to enslave even the largest of beasts in the Warhammer world. And it's said they kind of have a unique ability to do this due to the kind of innate connection that all elves have with nature and a kind of empathy they can build with living things. But whereas the high elves kind of like trees and the wood elves really love trees, these guys have been more like, okay, well, we'll use it to enslave huge monsters and they'll go to war for us, rather than use it in any kind of wisdom-sharing way or appreciating the beauty of the earth type way. They're more of a, all right, let's watch it bite things' heads off. That will be a fantastic afternoon. So they've taken that aspect to their innate gifts of understanding aspects of nature. So good for you, Dark Elves, keeping it true to your reputation. But that's the High Beastmasters. The next lords we have are the Black Ark Fleet Masters. I think the Black Ark Fleet Masters won't necessarily appear as land units in Total War Warhammer, even later on with DLC. These guys, I think, will appear as admirals if they appear at all, and they'll lead any kind of fleet, and you'll be able to upgrade them from there. But essentially, these guys are the pirate masters of the Dark Elves, and piracy is a huge part of what drives the Dark Elf economy, and these guys will be leading the charge out on the open oceans of Total War Warhammer 2. Black Ark Fleet Masters, renowned pirates who have built fearsome reputations through years of raiding the lands all over the world and bringing back huge wealth to Nagaroth itself. Moving on to the hero units in the Dark Elf army, we will start off with the Masters. Now, the Masters are essentially your Empire captains, essentially your paladins.
And much like the High Elf nobles, it was kind of surprising that these guys didn't make the cut in the starting rosters for Total War Warhammer 2, but because they didn't, and because that kind of training and martial role that's been occupied by things like the Empire Captain is taken up by the Death Hags, I doubt we're actually going to see the Masters involved in Total War Warhammer 2 at any point in the future, simply because the role they'd fill from the hero's perspective is simply occupied at this stage. So moving into infantry units,
we have the Sisters of Slaughter. Now, over the entirety of Nagaroth, the Kingdom of the Dark Elves, every single city has a gladiator arena. It's one of the most favored forms of entertainment in Nagaroth. They love watching themselves some blood sport, whether it's traitors being eaten by monsters, gladiators fighting each other, gladiators fighting monsters. It's all good as long as there's blood being spilled somewhere. Now, the Sisters of Slaughter got their start as just a dozen sisters from a single ruling family in Nagaroth who were betrayed, disgraced, and then dispossessed. They then pledged themselves to the elven god Eldrazer. Now, Eldrazer is the Lord of Blades. They asked him to help in their quest for vengeance. Now, they carved their metal blades into the bones of their enemies long ago, but the Sisters of Slaughter have continued to grow to become the prime gladiatorial fighting guild in Nagaroth, and they train the finest gladiators around, and they all just happen to be women. Their idea is that the Lord Eldrazer gave them a gift of a kind of killer instinct. They don't have much soldiering discipline, and in fact the only time they really turn up into battle is when they've kind of grown sick of just slaughtering everything in the arena, and they feel like getting a new challenge. So they go and they offer themselves to armies or to raiding fleets, and they say, how about having us along? And any dreadlord would be a fool to turn them down. So they go along, and they don't really fight for money or wealth or anything like that. They're just looking for a new challenge, the next foe to face, to see if anyone in the world can be better than them. It's said because of this lack of discipline, they're kind of ingrained with a sense of instinct on how to fight, and it's thought that this is a blessing from Eldrazer himself to the Sisters of Slaughter, just blessing them with an instinct for combat rather than necessarily them committing themselves to huge reams of training and stuff like that. They tend to just launch in and fight and then go out, have a party, launch into the next fight. Not a lot of training gets done. So on the battlefield, you'll see these Sisters of Slaughter sort of gaily laughing away to themselves, with nary a care in the world, dancing gleefully into battle, and it's said that they can bypass entire shield walls with a single leap, jumping right over them and just massacring the unit in behind. So these guys could have quite a stunning charge if Creative Assembly do it right. That'd be cool to see these gladiators leap over any kind of formation or any kind of charged defense units and just completely massacre them from the center of their unit body. They have a couple of special rules of Sister of Slaughter. They have the Dance of Death, which is so aerobic and graceful they can kind of dodge any kind of attacks, and this presents itself as a ward save for them on the tabletop of the game. They also have the Trial of Blades, which is when they encounter a unit that is statistically stronger than them, they get a bonus for their chance to hit and a chance to wound. So effectively, it's about them meeting an enemy who's better than them and them themselves raising their own level of combat and enjoying the combat that much more because it's a suitable foe. This could be done in Total War Warhammer because you could tie a character trait to them that gives them a bonus when they have the combat stat. There are stronger and faster units nearby, which pops up in battle sometimes if weaker units are fighting better units, and that could kick in their stat effect where they get a stat boost because they're fighting a unit better than them. And that would be something really interesting to have in Total War Warhammer 2 as a stat thing and be very true to the lore and be very cool to see. So that's the Sisters of Slaughter. Now we also have the Doomfire Warlocks. The Doomfire Warlock were male magic users who were based out of the city of Hagrif. And when Malekith got word of this prophecy of demise I mentioned earlier, which is the reason there are no male sorcerers in the Dark Elf armies, he went to see the Doomfire Warlocks and said, look guys, you're magic users, I think a magic user might one day usurp me, so I'm going to take it out on you guys. And the way he did it was he used his own not insignificant powers to essentially tear their souls from their bodies to a certain extent and leave their souls teetering on the edge between our world and the realms of chaos. So almost kind of sacrificing them to Slaanesh, who devours all the elven souls, short of a few exceptions, or if the elves manage to save their own souls. So they're teetering between Slaanesh and the realms of the living. And how this manifests itself is that they have runes on their body, and these runes will start to grow and burn with an excruciating fire and continue to spread across their entirety of their skin until it covers them completely, and then at that point it consumes their soul and they are consumed by Slaanesh himself. They can, however, fight this off. And the way it works is, if they want to put off having their souls devoured by Slaanesh, they need to make sacrifices to Slaanesh in their stead. And the purer and more powerful the soul, the more time they'll buy for themselves in terms of their own mortality. So they're kind of on this constant ticking clock in terms of their own life. Now, because they were magic users, they can still use magic. These guys will operate not dissimilarly to Sisters of the Fawn for the Wood Elves. They should have magic spells attributed to them that don't draw from the pools of magic. So the magic spells they have attributed them in the tabletop is Soul Blight and Doom Bolt. Now, Soul Blight you guys will recognize from Total War Warhammer already, but Doom Bolt is one of the spells from the Lore of Dark Magic, which we don't have in the game as of yet. Those should be the two spells that the Doomfire Warlocks have, irrespective of magic pool. They are armed with melee weapons that are poisoned. So they have these poisoned scimitars that they use as weapons, which when they cut an enemy, essentially robs them of all of their senses. So they go blind, they go deaf, and that's just so that the Doomfire Warlocks can collect them up later and really put the ritual into the sacrifice to greater appease Slaanesh, so he doesn't eat their souls as quickly. So because they're halfway between the two worlds, that's why they have this kind of ghostly appearance. And that is the Doomfire Warlocks. They are also kind of a light cav, so they can fulfill that role, except these guys also have magical spells attributed to them. So I suppose these guys would be like the ultimate upgrade from the Dark Riders, because they kind of serve a similar purpose as far as light cav goes. They can ride down missile units, they can ride down artillery units as well, but they also have magical abilities attributed to them, as well as poison. And on the tabletop, they also had a ward save, so they can be fairly hardy as well from both missiles, melee, and magic attacks. And that's the Doomfire Warlocks, once male magic users, now just these kind of horrendous deformities just trying to buy enough time by sacrificing to Slaanesh. The next chariot we have is the Scourge Runner, and the Scourge Runner is manned by Beastmasters. As you remember at the top of the video, in the Lord section, I mentioned the High Beastmaster. These are just regular Beastmasters, and they go around the countryside of Nagaroth in their chariots, which are armed essentially with a bolt thrower. So in a way, these are kind of moving artillery units, and they fire out a harpoon with a chain on the end of it, really designed for catching monsters. And they have nets and all sorts of things. So they're not sort of just a downgraded model of the Cold One. They would serve very different purposes. This is much more of a missile-focused chariot. Now, on the tabletop, the Scourge Runner, with the Beastmasters on it, looking to capture more animals, when they face a monster on the opposing army, they could fire their bolt thrower, which can fire at any target, but when it fires at monsters, it gets them, the harpoon lodges itself in the monster. Then the idea is that they use the chain to reel the monster in. So they can draw a monster closer to them. I think it was 3 inches on the tabletop, if I remember correctly. But they can draw the monster closer to them or displace it from its location, which in Total War Warhammer would be amazing to see. Imagine these guys just firing that thing into a giant and then just dragging the giant along for a bit, separating him from the rest of the army, allowing you to finish the giant off in a controlled manner, or at least putting him out of action for a little bit. That would be amazing to see, but I think just the way that animation would have to work, I can't see them implementing it for this one unit. But what they probably will have is there'll be a chariot with a powerful missile weapon on them with a bonus versus large. That's what I imagine. Now, the idea is that this chariot also has nets, because they're beast catchers essentially at this point. So it would be cool if they had a net of Amantok equivalent, maybe a much smaller area that they could cast it over. That's kind of like them throwing out the net from the chariot, and they could catch units that way, maybe with a more limited range than a net of Amantok. And it would maybe appear non-magical on the battlefield as well. But it'd be good to see them maybe slowing down other units. Just that's more of a lore thing than a rules on the tabletop thing. But yeah, essentially a very mobile artillery unit, the Scourge Runner Chariot. Next up, we have the Bloodrack Shrine. Now, this is an interesting kind of chariot. It's propelled by magic, and it has a Medusa chained to the top of it. Now, Medusas in the Warhammer world, or at least in the Dark Elf armies, used to be sorceresses under the tutelage of Morathi. And she had them in her city of Grond, and she was teaching them dark magics, but these guys went a little bit too far. They started to use their dark magics, not just to rejuvenate the looks they already had with the blood cauldrons and like making themselves young again, but they started to use it to change their appearance, to make themselves pretty, and they were very successful at it. They in fact made themselves prettier than the elven gods themselves. At this point, the elven goddess Atarti, who is the elven goddess of pleasure and lustfulness, decided, that's not on, you can't look prettier than me, and cursed them all with these painful serpentine bodies. And not stopping there, she's like, no, that's not enough that you look like a snake monster now. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to take away most of your mind and your ability to think logically. So they've been kind of reduced to almost beast-like levels of intellect, but given just enough kind of human intelligence to remember what they once were and how powerful and beautiful they once were, just so their misery is compounded. At that point, you'd think, oh, Morathi might be pissed off at the goddess, but Morathi knows how to play the hand she's dealt, and so kicked them all out of her city, sent them into the wilderness, and then thanked the goddess for punishing all these upstarts, because she wasn't punished herself, because Morathi is already smoking hot. She didn't need no magic to make her look great, so she never used it to improve her look, so the goddess never took vengeance on her. So she just had to go out and recruit new sorceresses, really. Essentially, all the old sorcerers under her command fled into the mountains, hid, started living in underground lairs, and Morathi now, whenever she needs something, you know, a little extra oomph in a battle, she sends some troops down into the lairs of where these Medusas now live, and they manage to, at probably quite high casualties, capture one of them, and they chain her to this chariot, the Bloodrack Shrine. They also have witch elves guarding the Medusa, kind of looking over her, but these witch elves are very careful because the stare of Medusa, unlike in our own kind of ancient Greek folklore, the stare of Medusa in the world of Warhammer doesn't turn you to stone, but it causes you to bleed from every single pore you have. So you essentially just, all the blood leaves your body through your skin, leaving you as kind of a little puddle of gore at the end of it. To combat this, the crew of the chariot itself, the witch elves who are in charge of watching over this Medusa, cover their faces in this kind of mirrored silver mask, and that lends them some modicum of protection against the power of the Medusa. It's said that by her simple presence on this chariot, she has a number of different effects on the units around her. So because of her kind of eternal suffering in this body that causes her pain every single minute of every single day, the fact that she remembers how beautiful and how powerful she once was, and is very aware of all the horrible things that happened to her, the sense of agony from the Medusa is almost said to be palpable, and it causes this aura of agony around her. Now, enemy units, this puts them off. In fact, it gives them a leadership debuff, any enemy units around the chariot. But Dark Elf units get a leadership buff because they love agony. They delight in it. They pleasure in it. They can practically taste the agony of the Medusa, and it really revs them up. It also, of course, because it's a bloody Medusa chained to a huge chariot with massive spikes at the front, causes terror. It has magic resistance. The chariot itself has the avert your gaze rule. The idea is that people are looking away, trying not to bleed to death from looking at this bloody Medusa on this chariot, that they're taking damage from the magic attacks of the chariot itself. So all units within a certain area take damage. Damaging aura would be around this thing, as well as a leadership debuff at the same time. Now, all of that on top of the stare of the Medusa herself, which acts as a shooting attack on the tabletop, but I think will probably be translated across as a magic attack in Total War Warhammer, where she picks a unit and essentially does damage to that unit when she stares at them, because some of them are just bleeding to death out of their ear holes and eyes and wherever else they're bleeding to death out of. So this could potentially be an absolute damage train, not only debuffing your leadership but hurting you at every moment. This could be a potentially horrific unit to encounter in Total War Warhammer, and I look forward to it, and hopefully they implement it with all those different rules it has from the tabletop, because the systems for it are already really in place in Total War Warhammer. The systems wouldn't be too tough an ask. Okay guys, so moving on, we have monsters. Now let's start with, one we've been talking about a little bit before, the Medusas. Now some of the Medusas can be, if not coerced, maybe just decide to go into battle. They're just a little bit frustrated and sad, and they go into battle and fight. Now I think we'll see Medusas implemented in Total War Warhammer 2, not necessarily as single units, but as maybe a pack of 6 of them, maybe like trolls, and they'd be essentially a monstrous infantry. They'd have their stare ability, but only one for the unit, and that could do some damage to units you cast that on. But apart from that, they're decent melee fighters. They'd have to have, on the tabletop though, they have terrible leadership. Because they're in agony, because they're such miserable bastards all the time, then they don't have great leadership as monstrous infantry units. So I think they'd run away fairly easily, much like trolls do in Total War Warhammer currently. So that's how I see them implemented. So that is the Medusas. After the Medusas, we have the Charybdis. Now, the Charybdis, unlike the Hydra, which is a mountain-dwelling creature, is actually a sea creature, and it tends not to venture onto land too often. Now, the Charybdis is the golden jewel of a Beastmaster's collection. All Beastmasters around Nagaroth would love to have one of these monstrosities under their control. It takes a huge amount of effort to catch one. You, in fact, have to get a sorceress to use her magics to tempt it out of the deep where it lives and just eats on any creature it can come across. One of these is said to be more than capable of wiping out an entire Dark Elf army, and they are just vicious. Now, the Beastmasters take a lot of pride in sort of bragging about them being able to train one of these things, but the thing is that these things so much love violence and hunting and eating that it really doesn't take much to get them into a battle. All it really takes is the odd flick of the whip just to make sure he's pointed in the right direction and doesn't end up eating your own troops. Now, this is a hardy and enormous creature, and it, like the Hydra, has terror, but it also has poison. It also has armored scales. And in terms of some of its abilities, it has something called the Abyssal Howl, which essentially on the tabletop would cause units to have to re-roll successful leadership tests, so essentially morale tests. But in Total War Warhammer, that's not really the way the system works. So in Total War Warhammer, what essentially that would be is, I imagine, a massive leadership debuff. On the tabletop, this Abyssal Howl did not affect units that were immune to psychology or themselves caused fear or terror. So you could have units that were immune to psychology be able to resist the Abyssal Howl. That would be a cool little touch just to stay extra true to the lore over there at Creative Assembly. But essentially it has this ability to cause huge leadership debuffs coupled with its terror. It could go in, have a huge charge against a unit, cause it this Abyssal Howl, and really almost break on most units in the game fairly quickly with that particular ability. It also has the Feast of Bones ability. Now, this is a fascinating little skill it has. Essentially, on the tabletop, if you picked a single model, so just most likely a hero unit or another monster, those would be the only things you'd really attack or put all your attacks into one single model of. If you landed all those hits, you essentially got another potentially 6 hits on it. I think it's as many as, forgive me if I get the rules wrong on the Charybdis, but I think it's as many as maybe 12 hits, which is huge. So essentially, this monster is a monster killer. That's how you'd have to set it up in Total War Warhammer. So all that complicated rule I just tried to badly explain would essentially translate in Total War Warhammer as a huge bonus against large. This thing should be able to kill anything else that's big. It should be able to go there over to a giant and eat its face off. Like, this thing is a monster killer, and that's kind of the role it plays in the army. If you want a unit killer, you're probably looking at the Hydra with its fiery breath, its fireball spit. But if you want a killer of monsters, this is the thing you're after. You want something to bring down a giant, you want something to bring down a Shaggoth. Here's your guy. So moving on from that monster, let's have a look at the Skaven. So that brings us neatly on to the Vermin Lord. The Vermin Lord can only be summoned forth by a Gracia. The Vermin Lord himself is a demon of the Horned Rat, much like something like Bloodthirsters, which you, if you're new to Warhammer, may not have seen, but the big winged, sort of almost classical demon-looking like creatures you may have seen models of in Warhammer. They're demons of Khorne, whereas the Vermin Lord is a demon of the Horned Rat. He gives off an aura of might and decay and is said to be extremely wise and knowledgeable and cunning, much like all Skaven, meant to be kind of the living embodiment of the ideal of Skavenness. Now, they are in equal measures said to be majestic and disgusting, towering over the rest of the Skaven hordes. They can summon forth their weapon, the glaive, from the warp or the realm of chaos, whichever way you prefer to reference it, summon it forth as like from nowhere, and then just starts to lay swaves of destruction and murder down upon any who dare step up to challenge the Vermin Lord. Now, a couple of things about the Vermin Lord is that they have some innate abilities. They can said to be able to be so cunning that they can smell lies on you. They're constantly sort of twitchy and pacing, and that's said to go towards the idea that they're always thinking, always processing, always running through schemes and how best to overcome them. But the Vermin Lord themselves has a special rule whereby they can't actually be the generals of their army. Because they are this summoned creature, it turns out they can't really lead armies, if I remember the rule correctly. So we likely won't be seeing them as generals in Total War Warhammer 2 because they can't lead armies per se, but perhaps we'll see them as unique units, and that's how they'll be brought into the game as unique units, or not unique units, but just rare units, or more interestingly, maybe just a summon that the Grey Seers can do, and they appear temporarily and then disappear again. That might be a way we see them implemented in the game as well. Now, on the tabletop, they have a couple of special rules. They cause terror because it's a big demon rat, and that is truly terrifying, if you ask me. They are immune psychology, because all things that cause terror tend to be immune psychology. They have a 5+ ward, which equates to a 1/3 ward, essentially, a 33% ward against all incoming damage. And their Doomglaive does a lot of extra damage. So whereas a normal wound in Warhammer the Tabletop just counts as 1, if you're wounded with the Doomglaive, that is a roll of a dice with 3 sides. So they could do as much as 3 wounds compared to a normal unit's 1 for every time they wound an enemy unit. They also have access to both laws of Skaven magic, much like the Grey Seer, and they have access to the 13th spell as well. But that's the Skaven Vermin Lord. Quite an intimidating monstrosity on the battlefield. I look forward to seeing how Creative Assembly implement this rat demon in Total War Warhammer 2. So moving on from the Vermin Lord, let's go on to the heroes. Well, let's say it's really hard to identify any of Skaven as heroes, but you get where I'm going with this one. So we have the Chieftain, effectively like the next rung down from the Warlords. Chieftains tend to be loyal to the Warlords themselves, well, at least for the moment, until they can spot their opportunity to rise to Warlord and take over any clan or tribe. So Chieftains will be very much your melee-focused heroes. Now the Chieftain looks to have gone the way of the High Elf Noble and the Dark Elf Master, in that they were maybe a bit of a generic downgrade from your typical melee lord, so they kind of just skipped them out of Total War Warhammer 2, and much like those other two, I think these guys probably won't appear at any point in the development of the Skaven army, simply because also their niche has been filled by other units, like the Skaven Assassin in this case. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're probably going to see the Skaven Chieftain at any point down the line, but you never know, I might be wrong. So not really much to add on that. The Chieftains sitting in the wings, biding their time, sneakily waiting to claw their way up, murder their warlord, and take over probably at some point, should they have the cunning or strength or combination of both to do so. So after the Chieftains, we have the Warp-Lock Jezzails. Clan Skryre, when fighting the Dwarves, started to pick up the weapons of the Thunderers, the rifles, and after a bit of fidgeting and tweaking and really getting it to work properly, they managed to improve on the design and invented the warp lock Giselle. Now these effectively, as the image and kind of gives away, are effectively sniper rifles, but it takes 2-man teams to fire one of them, and it's just a design improved upon the dwarven rifles that fires high velocity refined warpstone, and this makes them warpstone weapons which deals magic damage. So they will pierce through a shield, pierce through a breastplate, pierce through a body, and go back out the other side. They're that deadly. Now, they have this protective, I can never get this word right, but pervase, I think that's how you say it, which will protect them from artillery fire, give them an armor bonus in the tabletop, but I think maybe in Total War Warhammer 2, it'll probably just protect them from missile damage, because if you just go up and kick it over, you're probably right in there and attacking them with your sword or whatever. So that is the Warplock Giselles, another fiendish invention from Clan Skryre, and another invention built upon through the forced innovation they had to do in the war with the dwarves. Now, as I mentioned in my future upcoming DLC predictions, which I've mentioned before, and there is a link to down in the description below, I think these guys will come into the DLC along with a lot of these other artillery teams we're about to talk about, with Ikit Claw and the kind of Clan Skryre themed DLC. Now, there's a very good story about these guys and the dwarves when they've been fighting, and that is the story of, I think, Natty Bubo. Now, Natty Bubo, when these first started to come onto the scene, proved to be the best marksman that the Skaven had, and he's said to have been able to nail a dwarf from a huge distance away through their telescopes when they were sort of sighting for artillery and stuff like that. Now, the dwarves, being completely unable to accept the notion that these rat men had discovered a way of outranging their own rifles, just kept sending guys up there to look through a bloody telescope, and each one after the other, was getting sniped by this guy, Natty Bubo. Now, I think Natty Bubo is probably dead by now, but it just shows I think it's a nice story that highlights the stubbornness of the dwarves and some of the skill that these Skaven marksmen might have going forward when one has to face off against them. Now, these guys were probably going to be particularly dangerous to characters in Total War Warhammer 2, just doing a huge amount of damage. I can't imagine the guys at Creative Assembly are going to give them a very good firing rate, because it does take 2 guys just to fire the bloody thing off and aim it. But I think they will do a lot of damage when they hit, and that's why I think they will be a huge danger to characters, particularly any ethereal units or characters that one might be going for. So indeed, something to watch out for there, potentially a very deadly unit. I have no idea sort of size-wise what Creative Assembly might do with these guys, but just something to watch out for. So moving on from the Warplock Giselles, these deadly snipers of the Skaven army, we are going to take a look at some of the monsters and beasts in the Skaven army. So let's start with the smallest of the beasts in the Skaven army, and that is the Rat Swarm. And really, it's just what it says on the tin. Rats, just like we know them today, live all over the Empire, underneath their cities, and when Skaven armies go on the march, it's said that the normal rats around the world feel some kind of innate calling, and so scurry to beneath the feet of their much larger brethren, and serve to aid them in any kind of swarm or formation and attack whoever they're asked to. So that's really just the idea behind the Rat Swarm, just some rats who have come to join in the fun with their Skaven brethren. They're, as a swarm unit, they're unbreakable, but that's really them. They don't block line of sight for missile units or anything like that, another trait that they have on the tabletop. So if we see them, I'd be surprised. Somebody keeps commenting on all my videos whenever I mention a swarm that at some point Creative Assembly have said that they'll never do swarm units in Total War Warhammer. I've never seen that quote myself, but that might be true. So we may never see the Rat Swarm, but it's a thing and it exists. So there we go. That's the Rat Swarm, just kind of a moving carpet of rats that will attack other units. So moving on from the Rat Swarm, let's have a look at the Great Pox Rat. Now, this is a mount I've mentioned a couple of times before, essentially a giant, diseased cavalry rat that warlords and alike can ride on. This is a particularly famous warlord in this model here. This is Nurglich, the leader of Clan Pestilence, and he rides a giant pox rat. Now, the giant pox rats have poison damage, so that will be in addition to them if we ever see them as a mount unit in Total War Warhammer 2. So that's really all there is to say about the giant pox rat. Horrific creature, bitey, disgusting, but there we go. Next, I want to talk about the Packmasters. Now I hear you say, Inept General, that's just a normal Skaven guy. Why is he in the monster section? Well, he's actually kind of key to a lot of the monsters and perhaps to a certain degree stop them rampaging around the place. They do tend to control some of these larger beasts. They give them leadership buffs. They stop the beasts just going mental and running around attacking everything. Maybe Packmasters might be introduced just to buff up that leadership a little bit for the larger monsters. So the Packmasters are specifically trained, and Packmasters tend to originate from Clan Moulder. Now, if you consider Clan Scryer the engineers of the Skaven Kingdom, Clan Moulder are very much the mad scientists stroke bio-engineers of Skavendom. That's maybe how I describe them. They like to cobble bits of living animals together and, you know, let's just see what happens. That kind of mad Frankenstein-like quality that I'm sure we all have a little of ourselves. Maybe just me. So that's really what Clan Moulder are about. And these guys are trained by Clan Moulder, and in fact, Clan Moulder, when they trade their monstrous beasts, tend to sell them along with their Packmaster leaders as well. And Clan Moulder is really the only clan that can produce enough Packmasters to sell along with the beasts. It's said that another clan can actually make Packmasters to control some of these monsters. I think that's Clan Kizor in the Darklands, where the sort of the Chaos Dwarves live. But other than that, it's really just down to Clan Moulder to supply the Packmasters. Now, they have an upgraded version from the Packmaster known as the Master Moulder from Clan Moulder. Get it? And they tend to get different weapons. The Packmaster has a whip more often than not, and the Master Moulder, which this chap is on the left, tends to have what they call a thing catcher. So that would give him Killing Blow on the tabletop. So if we ever see these guys, they might be a potential hero unit even later on. But I just don't know. I don't know how they'll be implemented. They could take a number of different approaches with it. But that's really what they're there. They take care of the beasts. They come from Helpit, where Clan Moulder's from, and they often have a whip or a thing catcher just to control the leadership of and the morale of a lot of these horrific monsters. But let's skip them. That's boring. Let's get on to the horrific monsters. Let's start with the giant rats. So, giant rats, you might notice we're going through a theme of size from smaller to larger. So, giant rats effectively are rats that have been experimented upon, had like maybe 2 heads sewn on them, had multiple claws sewn on their bodies, been bandaged, maybe have extra teeth, extra arms, extra legs. Just very huge rats. I mean, compare this model size to the normal rats, and they're almost kind of the size of dogs, effectively. And I imagine in Total War Warhammer 2, they may very much act like the hound units of other armies and sort of go around taking out maybe the missiles of enemy armies, stuff like that. That's the giant rats for you. They tend to act maybe like piranhas even, being able to devour entire people, entire bodies in just a couple of minutes between all of them. Just this ravenous hunger they have, along with a lot of the actual Skaven themselves, who, you know, after a battle will eat every dead thing on the battlefield if given half the chance. And they have a couple of special rules, one of which is Rat Pack, which gives them special rules when they're accompanied by a Master Moulder or a Packmaster, just helping their morale. And they have something called Wave of Rats, which allows a lot of them to attack at once. Neither of these are really translatable to Total War Warhammer, but, you know, just to let you guys know, they do have those special rules, and they might be used to implement something else in Total War Warhammer 2. But that's the giant rats, getting around, size of dogs if you just saw them from a distance, and you realize, oh my god, that's a bloody giant rat. Moving on to the artillery and the weapons teams of the Skaven army. So the first weapon is known as the Warp Grinder. Now the Warp Grinder effectively drills down into the earth and allows units to pop up in different parts of the battlefield. And we probably won't see this unit. Now the Warp Grinder is a weapon in its own right, but probably more of a melee or short range focus, so it won't necessarily play into any mechanic in Total War Warhammer 2 or fill any necessary gap in the Skaven army. So I think for the most part we will not see the Warp Grinder in Total War Warhammer 2. So moving on from then, let's go on to the Poisoned Wind Mortar. Now, much like the Poisoned Wind Globadiers, they're effectively firing off the same thing, but with bigger poison globes and in a mortar. So it'll give you the mortar, you won't have to have line of sight, you're firing up and over as all mortars work in Total War Warhammer. And it has the same horrific effects. One imagines they'll have a much larger area of effect, the Poisoned Wind Mortar. Again, a product of Clan Scryer, but will also be pretty quick, which will be an unusual feature for artillery pieces in Total War Warhammer 2. So the Skaven, these guys can move around and keep pace with regiments of Skaven. So it won't be like a mortar that the Empire have. These guys, I think, will have less impact. Maybe this is why they might still just be singular teams of just 2 units, or maybe just like 2 mortars going around with 4 units. Because they have to be a little bit rapid on their feet. They can't be as slow as the Empire artillery. Not if they're going to keep thematically with the Skaven army. So they need to be able to keep up and have a bit more versatility, but maybe do less area of effect damage, maybe be less effective than something like a fixed place mortar. Because this is just something strapped to the back of some Skaven. They're quick creatures, they can move about. So moving on from the Poison Wind Mortar, we have the Rattling Gun. Now the Rattling Gun is a machine gun, effectively, a minigun that fires out warp bullets and is really just a whirling machine of death. It's a relatively modern addition to Skaven armies, invented by Clan Scryer, and it's powered by warp steam. It's sort of a steam-driven engine that twirls the chambers, fires off the bullets. And like the rest, it does fire off glowing warpstone bullets, so it will probably do magic damage as well. But these things are rapid and devastating, but they do have a rule that means, on the tabletop at least, which is where they can't move and fire. So they have to like take a bit to set up and then fire away. So I think this could be implemented in Total War Warhammer 2 by just giving them a long setup time. Have them move about as quickly as a regiment of Skaven, fair enough, but take them a bit of time to set up before they can start firing at anything. But once they start firing, these guys should start dealing just immense amounts of damage. They're said to be able to just hail down an entire regiment of Orc boys, just absolutely obliterate them. In fact, they riddle their enemies with so many bullets, and as I've mentioned a couple of times, the Skaven have a habit of eating the dead after a battle, but when they come across the victims of the Rattling Gun, they have a special word for those victims, simply known as teeth breakers, because once they start digging into their bodies and eating them up, they'll often shatter teeth on the amount of warpstone bullets that have just been embedded in the victims of the Rattling Guns. So it should be an absolutely devastating weapon. So that's a Rattling Gunner. Moving on, let's kick things off with the Doomflayer. So the Doomflayer is actually one of the weapons teams, but because of the kind of thing it is, that it's used to effectively run into enemy formations, just start slicing and dicing, doing all sorts of damage, I put it in this chariot section. Now, it's not as quick as some of the other units in this section, but effectively it just moves along at the speed of a Skaven regiment. So it goes along and it can just carve through vast swathes of enemy lines. Now, the Doomflayer was actually invented, again, like a few of the other Clan Scryer inventions, during the war with the dwarves. And what one particularly inventive engineer of the Skavens had managed to do was cobble together from the ruins of a crashed gyrocopter a rotating motorized iron ball of whirling blades. And it was used to just kind of smash into dwarven lines, dwarven sieges, just tear apart some of their armor, and do all kinds of damage. That was what the Doomflayer was invented for. Now, it does impact hits when it goes into contact, which effectively is a way of summing up that it's a unit that'll do significant damage on the charge. So it's kind of like a miniature chariot, really, just charging into enemy lines, doing all sorts of mayhem with twirling and swirling blades. One presumes one could add armor piercing to it in Total War Warhammer 2 as well, although technically I don't believe it had armor piercing on the tabletop. But that's it. It's actually quite well defended as well. The idea is that the Skaven can always hide behind this twirling ball of death to protect themselves, so they get quite a high armor value, and they get an extra defensive bonus as well from using this piece of equipment. So in close combat is a fantastically helpful tool to use in the Skaven army, particularly for breaking lines of Dawi and just carving them up with this monstrosity of a machine. So that's the Doomflayer. I imagine they may play in sort of units of 4 or 5 perhaps in Total War Warhammer 2, and just charge them in to enemy formations. They wouldn't be as quick as, say, a cav unit or anything like that, but pretty quick compared to something like an infantry unit.
Okay guys, we are going to add a couple of bits of bonus in here. These two next units are Forge World models. The first one being the Brood Horror, which is this monstrosity here, and the next one being the Wolf Rat. Now, people have been arguing for these two units, thinking that they sort of put towards the contribution for a Clan Molder DLC rather than a Clan Scryer DLC. I'd say we might see a Clan Molder 3LC Lord, who's the Molder, remember guys, is the ones who kind of cobble together the monstrosities like the two we just saw. But you know what, I still think it will be an Ikit Claw Clan Scryer one, because those are the more iconic units. But these are Forge World models as well, which kind of puts them to the side, not necessarily out of Skaven armies, but they're never in any official army book. They're kind of a side company that Games Workshop used to run called Forge Worlds. So we may see them, but they're kind of in the unlikely column. The only Forge World I think we've seen so far is the Mammoths in the Norska DLC, but we may see these introduced at a later date. I just thought I'd point them out rather than go into a huge amount of detail, as I don't really think we're going to see them, but maybe we will, and you know what, more units the better. So guys, that's about it for this unit of Total War Warhammer's 2 actual missing units from the initial rosters. Some of them will be filled out of DLC, but apart from that guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to catching you all on the next one.